What happens when a greedy developer bulldozes your land to build luxury homes without asking? For most people, it might sound like the end of the road. Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside your home, and finding bulldozers tearing down your trees, flattening your soil, and erasing every trace of your property, all in the name of profit. That is exactly what happened to me. The developer did not knock on my door. He did not show me any papers. He did not care about the history, the memories, or the blood, sweat, and years that went into owning this land. To him, my land was nothing but a blank canvas where he could stack rows of million-dollar houses and sell them to people who had no idea about the injustice beneath their foundation. Neighbors told me to let it go. Some said, "You cannot fight people with money. They always win." Others told me to sell what little was left and move on. But deep inside, I knew this was not just about dirt and soil. It was about dignity, about justice, and about standing up to the kind of greed that thinks ordinary people have no voice. So I started digging. I studied property laws. I knocked on the doors of federal offices. I gathered documents, maps, and old deeds that proved beyond a doubt that the land was mine. And when the time came, I filed for federal protection. That one move turned the tables completely. The project that had millions of dollars invested in it was suddenly frozen. Workers walked off the site. Trucks stopped rolling. Investors panicked. The developer who once stood tall with arrogance now scrambled for excuses, trapped by the very laws he thought he could twist in his favor. When the dust settled, it was not just about me winning back my land. It was about proving that one person, armed with the truth and determination, can stop an empire built on greed. That day I learned something powerful. Sometimes the fight you think you cannot win is the very fight that defines who you are. And that is how a greedy developer's dream of luxury homes came crashing down because I refused to stay silent. High voltage. This extended narration is emotional, dramatic, and sets up your story like a hook that will keep viewers glued. They thought I was powerless when they tore down my land. They believed I was just another ordinary person who would bow to money, power, and bulldozers. To them, my land was a gold mine for luxury homes, a million-dollar dream that would fill their pockets and erase my voice. But what they did not realize was that behind this land stood years of sweat, family legacy, and a heart that refused to surrender. The day it happened, I still remember the ground shaking with machines. Bulldozers roared across my soil as if history itself was being crushed. Trees I had grown with my own hands were torn down in seconds. The land where children once played, where memories were carved into every corner, was reduced to rubble, all without a word to me. No permission, no respect, just greed. Friends told me to walk away. Some whispered, "You cannot fight people who dine with politicians." Others sighed, "Accept the loss. It is too big to challenge." And for a moment, I almost believed them. Almost. But then I realized if I walked away, they would do it again to me, to others, to anyone without the shield of power. That was the moment I decided to fight. I turned to the very system they thought was asleep, federal law. I gathered my documents, dusted off every deed and every paper trail, and marched into the offices where justice still had a chance to speak. I demanded federal protection over my land, and when it was granted, everything changed. The project that looked unstoppable came to a sudden halt. Construction froze. Investors pulled back. The millions they had poured into their luxury dream began to crumble like sand. Their arrogance turned into fear. The same developer who once laughed at me now stood trapped, his empire collapsing under the weight of law and truth. In the end, it was not just about reclaiming my land, it was about showing that no one is truly powerless when they decide to stand up. My fight burned their million-dollar dream to ashes, and from those ashes rose a lesson. When greed meets determination, determination wins. Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside your door, and seeing everything you built, everything you loved, destroyed overnight. That was my reality. The land I had cared for, the soil I had walked on every single day, the trees that shaded my home, all of it was being torn apart by machines I never invited. Developers had marched in like kings, bulldozers roaring, workers shouting, and my land vanishing before my very eyes. To them, it was simple. My property was just empty space, the perfect site for their luxury homes. They saw dollar signs where I saw memories. They saw profit where I saw roots. And in their arrogance, they believed I was too small, too weak, too powerless to stop them. For a while, I felt crushed. Friends told me it was useless to fight. Some even said, "These developers have money and lawyers. You will lose everything if you try." But I could not accept defeat. This was not just a piece of land. It was my history, my security, my future. And I knew I had one weapon stronger than greed, the law. So I began my fight. I gathered every document, every deed, every scrap of evidence proving that land was mine. I knocked on doors. I made calls. I read federal regulations line by line until I found my answer, federal protection. That was my shield, my sword, my way of turning the tide. When I filed for federal protection, the impact was immediate. The construction site fell silent. The bulldozers stopped. The workers were forced to leave. The $1 million project they had boasted about was suddenly under investigation, frozen in place like a castle of sand before the tide. Investors panicked, deals collapsed, and the developer who once acted untouchable now stood cornered, his empire cracking apart. In the end, the luxury homes never rose. The project fell, and my land was safe again. But more than that, justice was served. I learned that when you refuse to stay silent, when you dig deep and fight with determination, even the mightiest forces of greed can be brought crashing down. So remember this, never underestimate the power of one voice, one person, and one fight for what is right. Developers stole my land for profit. They thought I would stay quiet, that I would watch helplessly as they turned my soil into gold for themselves. To them, my property was not a home, not a memory, not a legacy. It was just a piece of dirt waiting to be sold. But what they never expected was that I would fight back. And I did not just fight back, I used the law to shut their entire project down. The day it began, the air was filled with the sound of bulldozers. I stood frozen as heavy machines crushed the ground I once walked barefoot on. My trees felt like they were nothing more than obstacles. The land my family had poured years of work into was flattened in hours. For the developers, this was just the first step toward $1 million homes. For me, it felt like watching my life being erased. At first, I felt powerless. Everyone told me to give up. Some said, "You cannot win against developers. They have money, lawyers, and connections." Others advised, "Sell what you can and move on before you lose more." But I knew surrendering would mean giving away my dignity. If I stayed silent, I would not only lose my land, I would lose myself. So I turned to the one thing they underestimated, the law. I dug into my documents, gathered deeds, maps, and records that proved my ownership. I searched for every loophole in every clause, and then I filed for federal protection. That single step flipped the script. Suddenly, their unstoppable project screeched to a halt. Construction froze, workers walked away, and investors began to panic. The millions they had already poured into the project turned to dust. The same developer who once smirked at me was now cornered, trapped by the very system he thought he controlled. In the end, their project collapsed. The dream of luxury homes, the advertisements, the profits, they all disappeared. And all it took was one person refusing to be silenced. This was more than a victory for me. It was a reminder to everyone that justice still exists. When you stand your ground, when you use the law as your weapon, even the strongest giants can be brought down. This is not just a fight over land. It is a battle for justice. My land was more than just soil and trees. It was a part of my life, a piece of my identity, and a legacy passed down through years of hard work. But to a property developer, it was nothing more than an opportunity for profit. He saw my land as a quick path to building luxury homes and filling his pockets, and without hesitation, he destroyed it. The day the machines rolled in is burned into my memory. The earth shook as bulldozers clawed at the ground, tearing through everything I protected for years. Trees fell, fences crumbled, and in the blink of an eye, the place I once called home looked unrecognizable. To them, it was just business. To me, it was betrayal. At first, I was crushed. Everyone around me said the same thing. You cannot win. Developers have money, connections, and power. Fighting them will only destroy you. Their words echoed in my head, and for a moment, I believed them. But then, something inside me snapped. This was not just about land anymore. It was about right and wrong. It was about proving that even one person has a voice when backed by truth. So I did the only thing I could. I turned to the law. I collected every deed, every document, every piece of evidence that proved my ownership. I spent nights reading federal regulations, searching for a way to fight back. And then I found it federal protection. Filing for it was not easy, but once I did, the tide began to turn. The developer's $1 million project came to a standstill. Trucks stopped, workers left, and investors backed away. Their arrogance vanished the moment the law stepped in. What was once advertised as a grand luxury housing project quickly became a failed dream collapsing under its own greed. In the end, my land was saved. But more than that, justice was served. This battle was never just about acres of soil. It was about dignity, fairness, and the strength to fight back when the odds are stacked against you. And in that fight, I proved that the law, when used with determination, can bring even the most powerful to their knees.